committee. I knew they were going to be hammering away on that. And that's why we're not going.
Okay, well, maybe we don't even touch on that at all then. All right, okay.
Okay. Because
I'll Hello, welcome to another Black Horizons program. We want to thank you for taking time out to join us on our program today. This weekend, the 13th to 15th of May, blacks from across the province are expected to converge on the Halifax-Dartmouth metropolitan area to attend a conference sponsored by the Nova Scotia Alliance of Black Organizations. In today's program, we'll talk to conference organizers about this gathering and find out more about what is involved. I have joining me on the program, to my immediate right, Carolyn Thomas, who will be known, I'm sure, to many of you as a program officer of the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission. Carolyn is also the chairperson of the Conference Planning Committee. Next to Carolyn, I have David Hill, who is the president of the Black Business Consortium, who has been involved in planning for the conference as well. And finally, we're very glad to have joining us is our third guest on today's program, Churchill Smith, who is the moderator of the African United Baptist Association of Nova Scotia. And Churchill, of course, has also been very involved in the planning for the upcoming conference. Carolyn, I'd like to begin our program today by asking you why this conference and why at this particular point in time?
Well, Hamid, I think you will agree with me that a provincial conference of this magnitude is certainly long overdue for the black community. Despite the fact that several meetings and conferences have been held, I think that the organizations are now saying it's time to get together, evaluate, and look at what has happened and determine where we should be going. And as a result, the provincial conference.
I understand that you're expecting a fairly large conference in discussing the program before going on air. I think you were saying that this is perhaps one of the largest gatherings outside of the African United Baptist annual associations that have been held in the black community for some time. Is that right?
Yes, that is true. And we're really eagerly looking forward to it. I think that there will be a very good turnout.
Mm-hmm. Well, David, we mentioned in the opening remarks that the conference is sponsored by the Nova Scotia Alliance of Black Organizations. Could you tell us something about this? Is this a new group that's been established in the community, or what is the Nova Scotia Alliance of Black Organizations?
It's not a new group. It was forming of all the black groups in Nova Scotia to come together to do some planning for the future in the 80s. Where black people are really heading in society.
So it's really not a new group, but it's the existing groups coming together to try to work cooperatively on planning the conference?
That's correct.
I see. Carolyn, since you want to say something there.
I was just going to say, Hamid, that these organizations are rather relatively old organizations within our black community. For instance, they consist of organizations like the Black United Front, the African United Baptist Association, the Black Educators Association, the Black Cultural Society, which is fairly new, the East Preston Ratepayers Association, Lions and Lioness Clubs, also in cooperation with the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission. And as you know, we've been sitting around those boardroom tables for years looking at our programs and evaluating them, and everybody having an opportunity to have input. So I think really what this is an extension of the program, and it came out as a result of the group saying, look, we've done this and we think that it's good, but don't you think that we should go a little further? So in keeping with what David has said.
Right. I also understand that there was an attempt that was made to, in addition to the groups that you've mentioned, many of whom I'm sure will be known to the viewers of the program, there was a attempt made to reach out and try to involve organizations right across the province. groups from Yarmouth, for example, in as far as way as Glace Bay on the other end of the province.
Yes, it's straight across. You're right. And this has been done by various means, because we know that we have the organizations there, and we know that we have also been getting their cooperation over the past. So it's a matter of saying, okay, now rather than working from there, we're going to come to the central location, and we're going to start working here. And it was done, as you know, through the regional offices of the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission, through the outreach workers that you people at the Black United Front have in your community, and again, harking back to AUBA and those groups. So.
Mm-hmm. So it involves a fair cross-section of the black
Yes,
community.
and the response has been rather tremendous, I would say. People are sending in those registration forms, and it is very clear to us that it's going to truly be provincial representation there.
Right. Well, I want to come back to you in a minute, Carolyn, and talk to you a bit about some of the logistical aspects of the conference, registration, who can come, and so on. But before doing that, I want to jump down to you, Mr. Smith, as the moderator of the African United Baptist Association. The AUBA, of course, has been one of, as Carolyn has mentioned, one of the several organizations that have actively been involved in planning for this conference. Why is it that the church has taken such an active part, and what, in your opinion, is the significance of a gathering of this type? Normally, when we think of the church, we don't think of the church as, perhaps some may not feel the church being involved in this kind of thing. I think it's excellent myself, but
first of all, Hamid, I felt very honored to have the opportunity to represent the association in the planning of this conference. I feel that it's a very significant thing, because our African United Baptist Association is representative of 21 churches in our black communities, from Yarmouth in the west till a small community of Sunnyvale in the east.
Mm-hmm.
And in many cases, the various communities are very small, and the only voice that they have, so to speak, is the church. And the church, in many cases, is the spokesman for the various communities. Whatever transpires within our communities affects the church in some way. A lot of the people that belong to these various organizations are also people within the church. And in wanting to promote it all over the province, we felt that this is an excellent way, since our association does cover the 21 black communities. So, and with the cooperation of the pastors of our various churches, they are able to give publicity through their churches. And also, we feel that social action as such is something that the church should be involved in, because it's, when we think of social action, it's not just a matter of social action outside of the church, because whatever happens in the community affects the church, and therefore the church should have some say as to what transpires.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the African United Baptist Association is to be commended for taking this kind of positive initiative, along with the other organizations that have been participating in the planning of the conference. Carolyn, I'd like to come back to you and ask you to tell us something about the logistical aspects of the conference. For example, who can come, how can you register, where will it be held, what kinds of concerns. Give us a rundown on what the weekend is going to involve, if you would.
Okay, Hamid, on Friday the 13th, by the way, all of the functions are going to be held at Dalhousie. And on Friday evening at 7 p.m.
You're obviously, the conference organizers obviously aren't superstitious, because you're starting on Friday the 13th.
No, in fact, I didn't think about that, but I always thought that was a good day.
Yeah, well, hopefully it will be.
I think so. Okay, we're going to be going to the Rebecca Cohen Auditorium for our opening session. And we are having a special speaker. That's going to be Mr. Walter Douglas, who is the president of the New Detroit Incorporation. And he is going to be sharing with us a lot of the similar things that are happening in Detroit, telling us what they have been doing there. And I think that it's going to be really a stimulus. Mr. Douglas is, as mentioned, the president of the New Detroit Committee. He's been very involved with minority economic development in the areas of employment, community development, community self-determination, and he is a recipient of the Liberty Bell Award from Detroit Bar Association for promotion of justice. So I think that with that type of a background, he can certainly add much to our conference. Our overall conference chairperson is Dr. George McCurdy, who I'm sure most people know, who is the director of the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission. On that Saturday morning, we will be starting with registration at 8 in the morning. A little early, but not too early. It'll give us a chance to have coffee and get ourselves together. At 9 o'clock, it'll be open with invocation by Deacon Churchill Smith of the African United Baptist Association. And we're really pleased to say that we're going to have our national anthems given by Reverend Donald Fairfax, who is past moderator of the association, pastor of Victoria Road and Lucasville churches, and who has been very, very supportive of the programs that have been going on. We're going to have welcoming remarks by various dignitaries, that is, taken in our levels of government. Then our keynote speaker for that morning is going to be Mr. Ed Hodges, who is Vice President of Michigan Bell in Detroit again. And Mr. Hodges has been to Nova Scotia before and has observed our programs. And in fact, we think that he's sort of an extension here. He has been involved in the very first affirmative action program with Michigan Bell. He is general counsel for New Detroit Committee, or was in 1975, and founding executive director of the Michigan Civil Rights Commission. We have a presentation by panelists, or several presentations in fact, and the topics that will be addressed there are affirmative action and contract compliance, a strategy for the 80s. How do we increase the emphasis on education in the 80s? How important is black culture and heritage in a plan of action for progress in the 80s? Black community development, a major strategy for the 80s. How do we strengthen black business in the 80s? And I'm sure that you or others can realize that those presentations will be made by the groups that are participating and very involved in those areas of concern. For instance, the Black Business Consortium of Nova Scotia, the Black Cultural Society, the Black United Front, the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission, and the Black Educators Association. The luncheon that is going to be taking place in the McGinnis Room at Dalhousie Student Union Building, and the speaker for that is going to be the gentleman that Deacon Churchill has referred to, and I think that he certainly has a lot to offer us. That is the Reverend A. Roger Williams, because he has been very involved in social action in Hartford, Connecticut, plus the fact that he's associated with the Operation Push, and they've certainly identified with a lot of the situations that we're talking about in our province. Then we're also having a reactor panel, and that will be made up of government representatives and the business community.
Well, Carolyn, it sounds like quite an exciting reactor panel. Would it be fair to ask you to give us a bit of a sneak preview of some of the individuals who might be involved on the panel?
Surely. The Honorable Edmund Morris, who, as you know, is the Minister of Social Services. Struan Robertson, who is the President of Maritime Talentel. Mr. Gerald McCarthy, the Department of Education. Dr. Andy Mackay, who is Chairman of our commission and, of course, President of Dalhousie University. Mayor Daniel Brownlow, the City of Dartmouth. And Warden Arthur McKenzie for the Halifax County and Municipality.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now in addition to the reactor panel, what other things will you have on the program?
Okay, in the afternoon we're going to have concurrent workshop sessions, and in the sessions we will be discussing all of the topics that were mentioned earlier on, and we have resource people who we feel can quite ably respond to questions, and we have moderators and recorders in those sessions in the hopes that we will come back and be able to share in our final plenary session the things that we've talked about and get some sense of direction as to where we should be going for the balance of the 80s.
Well, David, I'd like to turn to you now as the president of the Blind Development, Black Business Consortium. I don't want to make you president of the wrong organization here. But as Carolyn was going through the program, two of the 5 panel presentations that she mentioned focus on the area of economics. We talked earlier to Deacon Churchill Smith about the involvement of the African United Baptist Association in planning and so on. Why is it that the Black Business Consortium got involved in this process? What is its significance as much as you're concerned?
We're really concerned about a affirmative business program. We have a lot to learn. Our executives and members of our organization has a lot to learn about affirmative business program. We know it's one of the keys to strengthen the black businesses in Nova Scotia. We also are looking for government input to support affirmative business programs, all levels of government. This is the only way our concept is going to become self-sufficient, and it's going to take a few years for it to become self-sufficient. And we're using the theory of we have a program that has to be subsidized, and it takes many programs within for it to work, such as affirmative business program, government guaranteed loans, performance bonds. This is what's lacking now. This is the problem that black business people have in Nova Scotia, being able to obtain performance bonds, loan guarantees, an opportunity to participate in government contracts. We hope from this conference that we can sit down and do some planning with government people so that they can learn about and understand about affirmative business programs and how they work and how it's going to help and assist minority businesses that cannot help themselves.
Mm-hmm. Well, Deacon Smith, Karen was mentioning as well that we're very fortunate to have at this conference the Reverend A. Roger Williams of Hartford, Connecticut, who's going to be speaking, I guess, at the luncheon in the conference, and his theme, of course, is going to be social change in the church. You were commenting earlier on the church's role in this particular area. I'm sure this must be a part of the program that's going to be of particular interest to you and the members of the African United Baptist Association.
Yes, that is true. And in fact, in discussing this at a meeting that was held with the treasurer of our association and other officials, particularly some of our pastors, this was mentioned that we should have some input from the social action within the black church. And Dr. McCurdy has suggested that this would be a good idea, and we want to commend him for being able to invite Reverend Williams, because he's an outstanding person. He's a Baptist minister, and he has a wealth of experience within the black church. His father and grandfather, I understand, were also Baptist ministers, so he certainly had this background and experience to be able to give us a good idea of the way the church can participate more fully in this business of social action. And we are very anxious to hear his presentation, and as a result, we hope that some of the things, I'm sure that he will mention some of the things we are already doing, and they may give us some new ideas as to how we can fully approach these from a different aspect than what we are presently doing within the church.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't pretend to be an expert on the Scriptures, but the Scripture says you shouldn't lay hands on any man suddenly. I hope you'll forgive me for doing that, and I hope the others of you will forgive me for digressing from the program for a moment. But I'd just like to dwell, while I'm with you, Deacon Smith, on the whole question of the black church in Nova Scotia and its involvement in social change. Of course, I don't think there's anybody who would deny the contribution that the church in Nova Scotia has made to the black community, historically speaking. Of late, however, there have been those who have suggested that perhaps the church has not been as active in this area as it once was. Is that a fair comment to make in terms of the African United Baptist Association, in your view, as a moderator, for example? Is this an indication that the church is going to become more involved in this particular area?
Well, some have felt maybe. I'm can't speak for the total church or the total association, but I think in some cases there are certain areas in which the church becomes directly involved, and there are other areas in which maybe it's not the church directly itself, but indirectly the church does become involved with certain issues, and there are different organizations within individual communities who would handle such programs. In other words, we can think of the drug and alcohol program as such. Well, other than the minister probably preaching sermons against the ills of it in accordance with the Bible, but there could be other organizations within the community as such who would be handling that type of program. And it may look like, well, the church is not really active, but they are as such, if we want to look at it in a different aspect. Maybe also social action. For instance, there are many issues that we read about in the paper, taverns that are opening close to a church, as an example. We see plebiscites and they want petitions and so on. Sometimes the church, although they are against it, but they really don't maybe support it as such, as far as coming out and making statements and resolutions and saying, well, we denounce such a thing. Maybe we could be more active, when I say we, the church, in this aspect of it.
Mm-hmm. I think perhaps one of the problems in this area too, and I don't want to digress too long, but one of the problems may very well be that the fact that historically speaking, at one time the church was the only institution that was existing in the black community. Now, of course, we have other organizations. Some of them are represented here this afternoon. Maybe people are so used to seeing the church as the only organization that may have led to the false impression that the church is perhaps not as active as it once was. But I'm just thinking myself, as you were mentioning here, that many of the people, for example, who are active on the association executive are also people who are very active in these quote-unquote sector organizations that exist in the community as well.
And I think another thing we should look at, as far as the church goes, that even though it may not be the total voice of the particular community, but I still would like to feel that the church is a predominant organization within any community, because the church, organizations come and go. They are formed and sometimes they die and so on, but the church will always be there. And I think the success of many programs within our communities will depend upon the cooperation that we get from the church, or sometimes, we may exclude the church. But I think we still must involve the church. And I thank Dr. McCurdy for involving the African United Baptist Association and the ministers of our various communities, because what takes place in the community is certainly a concern of any minister that is ministering in that particular community. Mm-hmm. So I think and once again, sometimes the organizations will ultimately want to have their programs announced within the community, and what better way than through the church, through the medium of the church bulletin or announcements from the pulpit from the individual pastor. And if you don't get this, if you don't have this, you bypass the minister at all, then you can't very well expect him or her to announce that over the pulpit or put something in the bulletin just for publicity's sake. In other words, I think we should never bypass the church in any activity that transpires within the community.
Mm-hmm. And I think the fact that the church is part of the planning for this conference suggests to any who may be critical of the church that you want to be there, you want to be part of this important development in the community, and rightly so.
Right. And I think sometimes, too, that sometimes there different organizations, some people don't know what does this organization stand for, who are behind this organization. And I think in most cases, or all of our churches, I feel, have this credibility. In other words, they know the pastor of that particular church, and they know, it's a credible, organization, of course, the church.
Well, certainly, in Nova Scotia, the church is the dean of our organizations. I think this year you'll be, what's 127th year of existence for the African United Baptist Association?
138.
138. Well, there you go. So it's even older than I thought. Carol, I want to come back to you in the closing minutes of today's program. And you were talking as you're going through about the reactor panel, and you mentioned there was going to be a number of government officials as well as individuals from the corporate community and others who would be participating on a reactor panel as part of the conference. What, in your view, is the significance of the participation of these people in this particular conference?
I think that it's really great, and I think it's great of them to accept, because obviously they have wanted to see progress in the black community. Mm-hmm. And I think that speaks of the mere fact that they have accepted the invitation. And when the community comes together, what it wants to do is evaluate, as I mentioned before, because as you know, in the time of economic restraints, We've often heard that slogan, what is it, last hired and first fired. And we are afraid of taking the chance of saying, okay, how are our programs going to be downgraded and so on. And it's all right for organizations, per se, to make these presentations on behalf of, but I think that it is important for people who are in positions of power to hear the grassroots people reiterating the same thing and knowing that that is the true feeling of the community. And I think it will be very important for them to see, or us to see that they are human and that they are concerned, and hopefully they will pick up and want to do something about it.
Kind of give the decision makers a chance to see to read the pulse.
That's right. Read it.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, we only have a few moments left on today's program. I'd like to ask each one of you about your expectations for the conference. When it's all over and the weekend is behind us, what do you hope will be the outcome of the conference? Perhaps starting with you first, Carolyn, and then turn to David and Churchill.
Okay. I'm hoping, as mentioned, that it will give us a chance to really dialogue with each other and to look at new things and also the things that we've been involved in. I think that it'll re-emphasize the fact that a lot of organizations have grown and have done a lot of good, and that strength comes when we can learn to lean on each other and keep it going. So I'm hoping that we will realize all of those things, but as an end result, we will perhaps come up with a plan of action to determine where we should be going. And then when we go back, we will have something to work, a base to go from,
Mm-hmm.
and really determine what our destiny will be for the balance of the 80s. And that will set the foundation that we need to proceed.
Mm-hmm. In 1 minute, David, what is your expectations for the conference?
Well, we hope to see new programs come on stream to strengthen the black business community in Nova Scotia, and also be a learning process for the black business people that attend this outstanding conference.
Deacon Smith, I give you the final word.
Well, I hope through this that we can realize that we are representative of many, many black organizations, and through the planning of this, that we are able to work together, regardless of individual leadership. And but we all have the same goals, and we're all striving for the same goals. And I hope through this that we'll give some new and fresh ideas that we will be able to sit down and to see where we can implement these, or to see just where we are now, and as we say, how are we going to go in the future. And through this, I think that we will be able to address some of these problems that we're all concerned with as black people in Nova Scotia.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to, unfortunately, we don't have time to discuss the conference any further. I want to thank you all for taking the time to come out and join us on the program today. Wish you the best of luck with your conference. Hopefully it'll be from all across the province, as you hope. We want to thank you for watching and invite you back next week. Going to do when you bring me on today? You're gonna bring me on when the music goes out, or are you going to signal me, or how? The monitor. Okay, gotcha. Okay, could you count to 5?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
All right. A little louder, dear.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
welcome to another Black Horizons program. I want to thank you for taking time out to join us once again. All forms of creative expression are a vital part of any culture and are essential for its survival and development. The black community can celebrate and find encouragement in a new book of poetry that has just been published and released by George Elliott Clarke of Halifax, entitled Saltwater Spirituals and Deeper Blues. Born in the black loyalist community of Windsor Plains, Nova Scotia, George is the son of William and Geraldine Clarke. He was raised and educated in Halifax, where he studied marine tropology and biblical blues poetry. He is currently completing an honors in English degree at the University of Waterloo. George's poems have appeared in several journals, and in 1981, he won the Writers' Federation of Nova Scotia's first prize for adult poetry. In today's program, we'll talk to George about his new book, Saltwater Spirituals and Deeper Blues. George, welcome to the Black Horizons
Thank you very
program.
much.
I don't know why, whenever I say the title of your book, I keep wanting to say Deeper Water Blues, but actually it's Saltwater Spirituals and Deeper Blues. Perhaps an appropriate place to begin is some explanation of why you chose this title for your book of poems.
Well, I wanted a title that would reflect both Nova Scotia and the black experience, and I couldn't think of anything better, really, than that. I think it's really important to celebrate that. I think we have a very special culture here, very distinct group of people, black Nova Scotian. I even like the name, like the sound of it. And this book, these poems, are based on that experience.
Mm-hmm. So when you say saltwater spirituals and deeper blues, can you break that down a little bit?
Well, the spirituals, of course, reflect our religious sense, our spiritual sense. And the blues reflect our experiences in daily life, especially in urban areas, while in country areas you have folk songs, that sort of thing. And I think that the basis of poetry is music. And these poems are based to some extent on black music, our music, church music, and also the music you hear walking down the street.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've known you for quite a while, but I didn't realize until I picked up a copy of your book that to what extent you were influenced by the Bible. I think you've recorded as saying that spiritually speaking, the Bible is a very important part of your poetry. Could you explain that a little bit, how the Bible has influenced you in your work?
Well, I think that the Bible is important for a lot of writers, a lot of poets, but it's also very important to black people here and of course the United States as well. And I just grew up with it. I didn't really go to church that often, but I found myself attracted to the book. I was attracted to the language. I liked the sound of the words. I liked the sort of things that the book talked about. I liked the ways it explained how people acted, what life was about, all those different things. And it really is quite a book. It's a great work of literature, a great work of English. Mm-hmm. It's beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Is there some tangible or specific concrete way that you could or example that you could think of from your work which would sort of reflect the influence?
Well, almost any poem will have some sort of reference to the Bible in it,
yes,
or some sort of religious sense to it. But let me see, I think that there's one here. Well, there's a line from this poem that talks about the most crimson and pleasant apples and the fattest calves of the land. Now, that line, it doesn't directly come from the Bible, but that sort of language is very biblical. Mm-hmm. And that sort of sense, this is a love poem, and that sort of sense of apples and calves, you run into that in the Song of Solomon, for instance, yes, in the Bible, which is a very beautiful book.
Right. Well, I mentioned in the introduction that you had studied marine tropology and biblical blues poetry.
Right.
Now, a lot of people who are watching the program, I'm sure, would like an explanation of what that involves.
Well, tropology is a small word for a big phrase, and the phrase is figurative use of language, or just playing around with words, basically. And I just put that in to reflect growing up in Halifax by the ocean and learning how to read and write and enjoying that and finding that to be a lot of fun. And biblical blues poetry goes back again to spiritual side of things, the Bible, and in the blues, again, black life in Halifax, basically, and in Nova Scotia in general. And also my experiences in reading black poets, mainly black American poets, and a lot of their work is based on those two things.
Well, I'd like to move into a different kind of experience for a moment. When we were chatting before the program, you were talking about one of the co-op jobs that was part of your program at the University of Waterloo, and you got into doing poetry by computer. We know that the computer is invading almost every aspect of our lives now, but it kind of blew my mind for a minute there when I was thinking about computers and poetry. Could you tell us something about that experience?
Well, okay, I have written poems on a computer, actually on just the video text terminal or whatever, and that's one way that I experienced poetry by computers. Another way, too, was in putting together a program to analyze a poem, in which the computer would just pull the poem apart, basically, before your very eyes, and take away certain words that you wanted it to take away, or would circle other words, keywords in the passage. It could tell you what sort of punctuation was in the passage, how many punctuation marks there were, lots of different things. It was kind of strange, though, seeing that happen. I really prefer working with the teacher than working with the machine, but it can speed things up a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say that it almost seems as though a computer, a machine, and so on would almost be the antithesis of what you'd normally think that, what a poet suggests. You'd almost think they would be diametrically opposed.
Yes, because really the only thing that the computer can do is give you a sort of quantitative analysis of the poem, but in terms of quality, in terms of the emotional aspect, you have to get that from human interaction.
What is the thrust behind this computers and getting involved in this particular area?
Well, I just became interested in computers, so I was working with them in a job situation in Toronto where I was controlling traffic signals. And from that, when I went back to school, I decided I was going to take a special course on computers and poetry.
But I understand when you were developing, as part of your work at the University of Waterloo, you were developing this program for the computer to do the analysis of the poetry. This was something that is part of a program at the university.
That's right.
And I'm curious to know what it is the university is trying to do. Is this an experimental kind of thing, or what is the raison d'etre behind getting computers involved in this kind of activity?
Well, I think it's because they see the computer as being sort of like a workhorse. They do a lot of the tedious sort of things, like counting punctuation marks, for instance, and where they are. That's really tedious, so why not let the machine do it? And I think that's the main reason. And as well, too, everybody's interested now in putting together computer-aided instruction programs and that sort of thing. And this was supposed to be sort of thing where a student could come into the computer, call up a poem, and have the computer take the student through the poem and basically tell the student what the poem was about. And so then the teacher could be doing something else rather than sitting there and going through all that with the student.
Perhaps in an area that the computer has no business getting involved in, perhaps.
Yes, except for the tedious things. Yes.
Right. Well, let's go back to your work now. And you've said that you consider your work to be a fusion of rural folk songs and urban blues. What did you mean by that?
Well, again, I think that was just calling on the experience of people here. I know that in country areas, at least in the past, people used to get together and make a lot of their own music, and I know in some places they still do. And in the city, too, we get together and make up our own songs. I remember as a kid, we'd have our own little sidewalk bands and stuff like that. And out of that, and just the way people talk and the rhythms of speech and so on. I think that we have developed a sort of very special speech, very special sense of communication, and that has found its way into my poems, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, this collection of poems, are they drawn from any particular period in your life, or are they more or less a cross-section of your sum total of your experience to date?
Well, some of them are from 1978, which is 5 years ago, but there's only a couple of those from that long ago. And a lot of them are from 1981, and a lot of them are from just last year, too. So they sort of span a lot of time, but in some ways they don't, because the two biggest sections of the book are very recent. Well, the middle section is the section that contains poems from basically the past 5 years or so.
Yeah, so it's pretty much your late teen and early adult life that the poems
Yes.
speak to. Well, now, do you have any personal favorites in this collection? And if so, why? Perhaps you could spend a few minutes just maybe referring to a couple of your personal favorites.
Okay. There is one poem I really, really like in this collection, and it's a poem called Homage to the Beloved Country. And I wrote this one on a computer terminal in Toronto, 60 feet underground, when I'm supposed to be controlling traffic. But
No, there was no major traffic disasters while you were off writing poetry?
oh no, computer can usually take care of itself. My job was to become redundant in a little while anyway.
Yeah, right.
So, okay, and I wrote this poem about being away from home and thinking about Nova Scotia and so on. And a sense, too, that there are problems here in this province. There are still a lot of people who are very poor. There are still a lot of areas that could be developed. And there are still a lot of problems just in being black in this province. But at the same time, it's a very beautiful place. And that's what I was trying to catch in this poem. I was trying to say, yes, there are problems here, but there's beauty too. And there's also a chance for love and a chance for salvation. So, here it is. Homage to the beloved country. The sorrow-stricken sun sinks in the lattice work of pines and spruce, and as it crumbles into dusk, its light falls crooked and bent on earth as it is in water. I watch its collapse and know tragedy, how a dream of freedom can be twisted into dust by a narrow and naked land. Yet, there is the fiery ebon beauty of Aberdeen Angus, pastoral in pastures, of new grass and yews along the Stewiacke River. The images of bluebirds meshing with green treetops to form the geography of the Cobequid Basin. The renaissance of a root and a name granted by the New Light chapels, of a cow and 2 sheep in this world. And suddenly I have a fervent lust for the meat of apples and the drink of rain, a Savior not nailed down to a cruciform of certainty, and to fly my love on wings of corn over a sky of meadow, to have the fat years follow these thin.
That's a very excellent poem. I wonder if I could have you just sort of go through the various parts of the poem and perhaps make some commentary on some of the concepts that are here. For example, when you talk about the renaissance of a root and a name granted by the New Light chapels of a cow and 2 sheep in this world, perhaps you give us a little bit of an explanation of that.
Okay, for that phrase, I was talking about the rebirth of a sense of heritage and a sense of who we are, of identity and so on. And that is granted by the New Light chapels, and that goes back to our history, Nova Scotian history in general, because in the mid-19th century, I believe it was, there was a big religious movement that swept the whole province, and it was this New Light chapel movement, which I think was a version of Methodism.
Yes.
And as well, the cow and 2 sheep relates back to what we were promised, loyalist blacks, when they came to the province. it's sort of similar to the American blacks being promised 40 acres and a mule
Yes.
upon being released from bondage. And of course, both those promises never came to be true. And yet that's part of our history. And it's sort of saying a rebirth of these things, rebirth of promises and a rebirth of spirituality and of heritage and everything else.
Hmm. Is there another favorite that you have that you could share with us?
Okay. All right. I think I'd like to read a love poem. And
Okay.
this poem is called Love Poem Song Regarding Weymouth Falls for Shelley. At the Sizzaboo, where the Acadian and the Micmac saw the 6 scholar birds, whose insomnia is natural, probably a million moons ago. At the Sizzaboo River, where it kisses wetly St. Mary's Bay, and fans on out into brown fundy tides, shimmering like a new-rolled Nile. This is where the world as we know it begins, all blue and beguiling, all because of her who homes with the pines, so elegant, evergreen, egalitarian, richly female. At the homeless highway where it waits and wails, asphalt anthems of hit and run, before plunging wildly into the woods whispering Kejimkujic songs of she I love and blossom notes of the most crimson and pleasant apples and the fattest calves of the land. There is built Weymouth Falls and its African Baptist church, and the lumber yards quaint, and the dwelling of her I take time to make time with. Delirious delight is mine, the careless debauchery of stars bearing only good luck, glad tidings, the sweet desolation of distance, ebbing and flowing, drunken joy of violent youth, violently in love, as she moves to apex of my cosmos, and the old troubled world wheels around her. Song pours itself through my flesh, drives me to her gravity field of beauty, even to the edge of the Sizzaboo, hand in hand with her.
Now, your poetry, George, this collection of that we have on the Saltwater Spirituals and Deeper Blues, is it aimed at any particular audience or any particular segment?
Well, yes and no. What I was trying to do with this collection of poems was to sing our song, our history, our culture, in a Nova Scotian context, because that's where we are. And also to speak to the rest of the world, too, and let the rest of the world know that we are here, have been here for a long time, and will be here for a long time to come. And the audience that I was trying to reach, or I am trying to reach, I hope is a vast cross-section of people, black, white, Nova Scotian, non-Nova Scotian, literate, and non-literate too. Some poems might be a little difficult, but I think that if someone is willing to go to a dictionary for 2 or 3 words, that the meaning will come through, and that I hope that this will be a book that you can still go back to 5, 10 years from now and still get some enjoyment from the poems that are in it.
It's certainly not pedestrian. It's very complex in some areas. I think it requires a fair amount of effort.
Oh, a little.
Well, I'd like to move away from the book for a moment and ask you a bit about some of the influences. Who have been your mentors? Who are the people that have really influenced you and really been inspired you in terms of your poetry?
Well, I think that the main influences were the Black American poets in the beginning. People like Henry Dumas, who's from Arkansas, he died in New York City in 1968. And there was another fellow, Conrad Kent River, who wrote a beautiful poem called 4 Sheets to the Wind and One-Way Ticket to France, which is just fantastic,
Yeah.
beautiful. Of course, Langston Hughes. There was a whole bunch of people from there. From English poetry, people like William Blake, Dylan Thomas, Milton, John Milton. Those people were great influences too.
Hmm. Well, now, you've described yourself as a preacher, a prophet, a pilgrim, and a poet.
Yes.
You don't normally think of all of those being contained in any one individual. Could you explain that a little bit?
Well, I like the sounds of P's together. So there you go, 4 P's together.
4 P's, right.
That's partly it.
Yeah.
And then partly too, I don't know, I think being a poet, because it is an unusual sort of thing to be these days.
Yeah.
It involves all of those, or can involve all of those. And different poets have been degrees of those things. Preachers, prophets, pilgrims, and of course poets too. And I think that if you're an artist, and especially if you're a poet, and you want to tell the truth as much as it is within you to tell it, then you have to be all those things.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, you were at the university. I guess writing is pretty well consumes almost your entire time now. I understand that even while you're at university, you were responsible for forming a writers' collective. Could you tell us a bit about your work with that collective at the University of Waterloo?
Okay. What happened was that in my 3rd year of university, I was really tired of going to the English Society, going to these other people and saying, why don't you have something for all the writers on campus? We can all get together and share ideas and trade information. And they would have little things here and there, but there still wasn't any sort of organized body for us. So myself and a couple other people just decided that we'll just go ahead and organize it. And we did, and it was pretty successful. We published one book of an anthology of poetry by students at the university, as well as little pamphlets of verse too, for people who are just starting out to write, never been published before. And we'd give them a chance to get their stuff out before the public, get some feedback, that sort of thing. And that was really worthwhile. And of course, being in Toronto too, being in the center of Canadian literature and quotation marks, right? That was a great education. Also got a chance to meet a lot of interesting people and a lot of people who write, that sort of thing. So it was a really good experience.
But the collective was primarily involved students on campus.
Oh,
and,
yes.
And I see. Well, now you talked about getting works published and so on. How difficult is it? I suppose that's a story in and of itself, just in terms of getting a work like this published.
That's true. Well, I started writing poetry seriously when I was 15. I didn't send anything out to be seen by anyone else until I was 18. And I got some good comments back. And one comment I got back was, get used to receiving rejection slips. And I can say that the day will come and I'll be able to paper at least one wall of my house with rejection slips. And that is very, very good, because of some of those rejection slips I got criticism, which helped me to improve. Some people just don't like the sort of things you write, but most of it was very, very helpful. And along with rejection slips, I've also been happy to receive some acceptances, and have been published in a lot of magazines across the country, and with more stuff to come out in the near future. And it is a bit of a struggle. It is a bit of just continual pushing on. Part of it being that I've been told I have a very unique voice, different voice, which you can read as a euphemism for not sounding like the standard white Canadian poet,
Yes.
which is true.
Yes.
And I think that as we develop as a people, and as more of us write poetry and engage in the arts, that we'll be overcoming those sorts of barriers and establishing that unique voice as being a very important and very good voice too.
Right now, though, it is a bit of a barrier. The subject matter that you're choosing to write your poems about is not something that is part of the status quo at the moment.
Not really, but I think it's changing, but it can only change as long as we all keep fighting to go forward. And one thing that really excites me about being back here right now is that a lot of things are happening artistically in our own community by ordinary people. And it's really, really good that we're starting to say, we have something to talk about, we have something to say, and we're going to go and do it. And in my case, I was also fortunate to have a very sensitive and editor and publisher by the name of Leslie Choice. And if I can slip this in, for those people who want to order a copy of the book, they can write Pottersfield Press, RR number 2, Porters Lake, Nova Scotia, and Leslie will be only too happy to send them a copy. And
So you've been published by a local Nova Scotian.
Yes.
You're a true
Indeed.
Nova Scotian. Yeah, you don't forget your roots, right
No,
down to publication,
no.
eh?
But the book is being distributed across the country.
Mhm.
And that makes me feel good. Also, some copies are going down to the States, too, because it means that, again, some of our culture, Black Nova Scotian, is going out to the rest of the country and to the rest of the world. And it's about time that these things happen.
Right. Well, you said we. Are you a voice in the wilderness, so to speak, or how many other up-and-coming black writers have you come in contact with in the last little while?
Well, I know I could name 3 or 4 or 5 right offhand. I know there are more out there. There are some people I know who write songs, who write poems too, but are too shy to show them to other people, too shy to send them out. And, well, they can always do what I did if they do want to send their stuff out to magazines, use a pseudonym.
Yes.
Use a false name.
Yes.
I used a different name on my poetry, sending it out for 2 to 3 years before I started to use my own name. And I was confident enough in myself that I was going to put my own name on my work. But that isn't a good way to get around the jitters, because then it's not really your work that's being rejected, it's this other person's.
Mm-hmm. Well, we only have a minute or so left on today's program. Our congratulations, by the way, on
Thank
your
you.
publication of this collection of poems. Will we see another one in the near future?
I hope so. I'm working on one.
You're working on one. Okay. Well, George, I want to thank you for being our guest today on the Black Horizons program. I hope that the sales of your book go well.
Thank you.
If you just want to take a second again, and perhaps you could just very quickly tell our viewers where they can obtain a copy.
Okay, from Pottersfield Press,
Yes.
Porters Lake, Nova Scotia, and they are $6.95.
$6.95. Well, thanks again, George. We want to thank you for being our guest and invite you back next week. Thank you for watching.